Hey again everyone, and welcome back to the channel for the next installment in our ongoing new figure showcase series, where we take a quick look at the newest release being added into my collection and do a little review and posing session. For today's installment, we're taking a look at Thena in 6-scale figure format from Hot Toys based on her appearance in Marvel's The Eternals. Or I think they just called it Eternals. And look, for starters, I know I'm probably one of the only people who actually pre-ordered this. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but realistically, based on the movie's reception, it's clear this wasn't a release that a lot of people were asking for. And then the decision by Hot Toys to release Thena, on one hand, it's not surprising, given that she was portrayed by Angelina Jolie, easily the biggest name from the cast. And I think Hot Toys was probably banking on that name recognition. And also, I think on the other hand, you have to consider that she wasn't the main focus of the movie. That was really Icarus and Cersei. So I would have thought those characters might have been at the forefront of any release from Eternals. Then again, I'm honestly even surprised we got one figure, let alone two, since Gilgamesh is also on order, and actually waitlisted. And yes, he was also a day one pre-order for me as well. But this was just an interesting license for Hot Toys. I didn't really think they were going to do anything with it, and then they kind of went in a very specific direction, which again, different from what I would have anticipated. So look, before jumping into the figure, let's talk a little Eternals. And I'll start by saying this. Looking back at what Phase 4 offered, I think down the line, or at least I still hope that down the line, we're going to look back at the cinematic portion of Phase 4 and say, you know, these movies weren't as bad as we thought they were. For example, with Eternals, I actually thought it was a really good movie. I know I'm probably in the minority, but I enjoyed it, and I liked that it opened up another section of the MCU, although I'm still curious what the ramifications are going to be. Now, the excuses for not participating in Avengers related events also felt a little more natural than, say, Nick Fury's reason for not bringing the Avengers into Secret Invasion. And then as far as characters go, I actually liked most of them. I thought the storyline with Thena and Gilgamesh in particular was a highlight, with kind of her mind going and Gilgamesh watching over her. And even the ultimate reveal that the Eternals, for all intents and purposes, were the bad guys for the movie, I thought was a change of pace for Marvel. It's definitely not my favorite of the MCU releases, but I still think it was a really solid offering overall. So let's take a look at Thena and the full package Hot Toys is offering us here. And while not one of the most accessory heavy releases, it's actually pretty decent overall with a few spare hands, but the highlight has to be the array of weaponry we're getting here, with all of them really being eye-catching with that clear plastic wrapped with what I'm going to call energy effects. She also includes a few alternate hands and the standard display stand, so again, it feels like a decent package overall with a fair amount of display options for the figure. So let's jump into those accessories a little more in depth, and we'll start with the spare hands. And look, nothing crazy here. You get a pair of fists and a pair of hands to allow you to hold all the weapons, and those are probably the ones that I'm going to be getting the most use out of, as I can't imagine choosing to display her without some of those great pieces in hand. Paint app wise, they're outstanding, with what they're calling a champagne color on the back of the hands that reflects light pretty well and looks metallic, while the skin portions of the hand have that very nice paint app that seems to have some freckling on it. So good pieces overall. Now moving on to the weapons, and the one that immediately stands out for me is the spear. Detail work is really amazing with the gold-like filaments within the clear plastic. It's an impressive way of recreating that energy look that we got with Thena's weapons, and this really is a highlight with the very aggressive looking spear tip with the energy blade and serrated edge at the base. It's all well done, and again, the key with this on the other pieces has to be the inlay work they did with the gold to give it that look from the movie. And they aren't just sloppily thrown in like gold pieces. There's a really amazing pattern throughout, so definitely the first weapon that caught my attention. Now next up we get her shield, which again, translucent plastic with the gold inlay work swirling around. These are a real highlight here with the set. On the shield, the gold is actually molded onto the surface, but you can tell the paintwork is just outstanding with no bleeding onto the translucent plastic. I also like the shape of the shield since it lets you use it as a support for the weapons. The way it connects to the figure is also smart with a clip attached to the back of the shield that slides onto Thena's forearm. really making it a great display piece and replicating what we saw on screen. And then the last of the weapons, you get a sword, an axe, and then 2 dagger-style weapons. One very much looking like a more standard knife with the blade and hilt, while the other is just a streamlined blade piece. For me, without a doubt, the highlight here is the axe. Design is really interesting, having a similar serrated edge to the one that's used on the spear. Detail work again is just impressive. I think in hand you really appreciate how much work went into these, but they all look great, with the key being the interior gold element that has some really intricate detailing work that you can especially see on the sword along the length of the blade. So I'm really impressed with all of these pieces, and there is a great variety here to choose from for display. And final accessory is a stand, which is the standard Hot Toys hexagonal display with Thena on the front and some interesting greenish gold writing on the surface, reminiscent of all the floating energy displays we saw in the movie. Again, nothing overly impressive or surprising here. Okay, now let's get to the main portion of the review, and that's looking at the figure herself, starting with what I think is the most controversial part, and that's the sculpt. Now, when Hot Toys dropped the final blogger images, the general response seemed to be that this was not an improvement, and in fact was not as good as the promo pics. I do agree that changes were made. Some were positive to make the sculpt more accurate, like having the crown sit slightly higher on her forehead. But I have to say, while I see some resemblance to Angelina Jolie, I think there was definitely some softening of the sculpt. But I think the biggest issue here has to be the eyes. There's just something a little off there. I think they might be a bit too far apart and maybe just a little smaller than they should be. If you look at the sculpt from all sides, there are definitely elements that clearly look like Angelina Jolie, but I keep coming back to something being off with her eyes. For me, it's a little surprising because this isn't the first time Hot Toys has sculpted her. They had previously done the Maleficent, and that was actually a really solid sculpt. Granted, it was a little more angular and not a straight recreation of a person. It's not to say it's a bad sculpt here. The detail work on the hair, the lips, the skin, all extremely well done, but I just don't think the likeness is there, which unfortunately brings an end to the string of near-perfect sculpts Hot Toys had going for them. Again, I have to reiterate, in itself, it's a great sculpt with the amazing detail work and paint apps that we've come to expect from Hot Toys, and that Hot Toys delivers better than most. It's just that I don't see the likeness here. Now, the rest of the figure, Hot Toys did an amazing job recreating what we saw on screen. The white and champagne colored armor looks great, although the pieces on the back seem a little oversized and don't fit as well on the body. The undersuit is actually a thicker rubbery material. If you look at something like the Spidey suit, it's a thinner bodysuit. Here you can actually feel the thickness. Paint apps are really good though, with that almost camo style running down the arms, the torso, and her legs, and the line work on the champagne armor, including the, let's call them, glyphs on her neckline, are really well done. Her skirt's okay, it drapes nicely, very flowy. It is a spandex-like material. If you've ever owned like an Under Armour compression shirt, that's what it really feels like. So interesting choice, and also no wiring for posability. So overall, I do think it's a great looking figure. So, final thoughts on this one. Look, I'm a Marvel fan, and I'm still enjoying the content for the most part. I honestly have liked everything, including the Eternals. The only show I was very disappointed with was Secret Invasion. But I always like adding new cinematic versions of Marvel characters to the collection. I'm at the point where even if the movies or shows aren't good, the collection is kind of taken on a life of its own. And the key now for me is adding characters that fit in well. And I do think Thena is a character like that. I thought her story was great, and once Gilgamesh comes in, I do think the pair will look great. I think the figure is a very solid effort. She doesn't have double bend elbows, which is a big miss, especially with all of the bladed weapons, although I have to imagine that the material choice for the undersuit would have also potentially restricted some of that added posability. But look, I think the figure actually poses remarkably well, and with the weapons, she really does feel special. Hot Toys did a great job replicating these and really giving us something screen accurate, and credit to Marvel for the way they depicted disability. Usually, I have to say I have some passing knowledge of the comic characters, but for me, the Eternals were a total unknown. So my first exposure was purely through the movies, so I'm not sure if they got the power correct or not, but the depiction on screen was pretty awesome, and more importantly, the figure is able to recreate all of that remarkably well. I think there was some talk about whether or not Hot Toys kind of phoned this one in, given the mixed reception to the film. Having the figure in hand, I don't think so. I think this is a really well done piece, and if the sculpt were a little bit better, this would definitely rank as one of the better releases from Hot Toys recently. It's just the likeness here that really betrays the figure. You might think I'm being too harsh, but I just don't see it. From a distance, yeah, you can tell who it is, but up close, it's not the best sculpt. Also, I did pay full price for this. Probably one of the few that decided to day one pre-order. I'm almost certain you'll be able to get this figure at a deal later on. I just don't think the demand is there. So if you're interested, I would say just keep an eye out. I think there's going to be a really good chance you can score a great deal on this one. Now for me, had they done the entire team of Eternals, I would have picked them up. I think at this point my only hope is third party, but even that seems to be questionable with third party releases really having slowed down lately. But I would love to have some other members of the team, especially Icarus and Cersei. The one total request that I would have that is out there, but it came to mind having Thena in hand, I would have loved for someone to have made a deviant based on the final confrontation. I think it would have been a better companion piece to Thena, but let's be honest, the cost associated with that kind of release with the low interest, not going to happen. But that's just my pipe dream. So overall, really good figure, held back by the slightly off sculpt, but still a nice addition, especially if you can get her at a deal. So let me know your thoughts on this one, and if you are enjoying the content, please consider commenting, liking, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.